Michelle, I think you're winning at working from home. What a good idea. Oh, you're on mute.
Someone was telling me that they had been sitting outside while on a Skype meeting. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to try that.
Yeah, we actually bought an umbrella a couple weeks ago because my computer kept overheating from being out in the sun.
You know, it does completely change, you know, the electronic media, being outside where you've got, you know, you're listening to the birds, you're hearing the, you know, water run down the road. So it's just very, very peaceful.
Very nice.
Davia, I'm looking here at who's here, and from the fundraising committee, and I'm not seeing Tim Gresseth. Was he going to be able to make it?
Yeah, Tim should be here. He actually just sent me some material. Project. There he is.
Hello.
Hey, Tim.
Hey.
We do have all of our members here, Caro.
Okay, great. Well, thank you all for this morning. That was, I think, really good. I'm proud of the document, even though I'm sure we'll change it in the future. It's good to get that done. So what we thought would be important is for the community to get some interaction with the fundraising group that's been really working hard to move forward and roll out a fundraising campaign. There are several individuals involved in that, Tim Gresseth being a key guy. Jessica is also, I think, supposed to be here. She's also important. I think she sent out some things.
She's here.
Is Jessica here? Great. Okay, so why don't I just turn this over to Tim, if you're comfortable with that, Tim, and just sort of get us started. The format, what we'd like to do is, first of all, just kind of get an update and get to know each other, and then have a common discussion about where we're going and try to get prepared for a formal launch. So I think it'd be good for you to just sort of lay out where you are and what you've done and who you all are, and have more of an open discussion about it.
Okay. Well, we've had a series of meetings about how to move a fundraising campaign forward, and the subcommittee focused on the marketing that would go behind a public campaign has been meeting consistently, I guess, over the last several months. I think Jessica could probably speak far better to the work of that committee than I can, and that really is an important piece. I mean, the marketing here of what we want to try to do in terms of communicating to the public and soliciting a very large group of small gifts is really central to the work, and that is the main thrust of our campaign, is to try to reach out to the broadest possible group of Oregonians, to ask them to get behind this campaign and help us in short order raise the money we want to raise. And so the thought is to do that in both a way that would utilize media, both earned media, as well as the social media platforms that most groups have available to them. And to do that, it's really going to take a joint effort, not just something that Oregon Wildlife Foundation, which is the organization that I represent and work with, can do. It's something that what we're going to need from is all conservation organizations that have aligned themselves with the Oregon Conservation and Recreation Fund to step forward and really help us reach out, not just to their constituents, but using their social media platforms to reach out to as many people as we possibly can. So to that end, I've been trying to work on a couple of things that would help us get more exposure within using media sources. And so I did submit a grant proposal to the Oregonian, which had put out a solicitation. Basically, they said they want to help the small businesses in the community kind of get back on its feet as it relates to the virus restrictions. And so they're offering a grant, cost share grant program to do some advertising both in their print and electronic versions of their newspaper, as well as through Oregon Live. And so I'm really here principally today to talk to you a little bit about what that might look like. I guess I would leave any additional comments to Davia and Jessica about the campaign, the larger campaign, and some maybe more of the specifics of it, if that's fair.
Yeah, and this is Davia. I'll just take a step back and say that from the beginning, we've been working with the foundation as a partner on this, and we've talked about this a decent bit, I think, but just to reiterate that there's a couple of reasons to have the foundation as the organization that's doing the fundraiser, in that donations to the Oregon Wildlife Foundation are tax deductible. And there is some question about donations to government. The foundation has the infrastructure to be a fundraising organization. And I believe this came up a little bit in some conversations we've had, that we've raised a lot of money through ODFW's electronic licensing system, which is that easy checkbox option to add on to your purchase, and that's working well. The only mechanism the department has to collect money from the public is through that system. And so we want to engage a broader group of individuals who don't actively go to myodfw.com and use their credit card for things. We're looking to engage new and different people. And so the foundation had the ability to collect those monies in a much easier way than the department has. And so then we're looking at these pathways of large dollar donations, corporate contributions, and then a big crowdfunding campaign. And so Tim is sort of helping us with all of that. And Jessica, who's on, is the lead on the marketing for the big crowdfunding effort. And I just wanted to recognize that Greg Mintz is here, and he said Representative Helm will join soon. And they've really been the lead on the big corporate push too. So I think we should hear from Jessica and hear from Greg and Representative Helm about those two efforts.
Yeah, this is Jessica. Thank you, Tim and Davia, for that. And yes, I wanted to reiterate what Davia just said, because I actually asked the question yesterday of Davia to make sure that the donations could be tax deductible, because I think it is a big it's a big issue for those who want to donate, and especially if we get larger donations. I think that we can that's a key point, just to make sure that we're aware of that. So I appreciate the Oregon Wildlife Foundation's ability to hold those funds for OCRF. So thank you for that. There is a group of us that are moving forward on the social media campaign. We are on track right now for a release of the social media, or the larger social media pieces, in mid-July, early August. I'm hoping that we can continue on that track. We have a call planned with the social media marketing group next Thursday at 10 a.m. And if anyone on the advisory committee is interested in joining that call, please let me know, and I will send you that call-in information. I know Carl and Mauricio are on that invite, but if others are interested, please let me know. We have some individuals that have volunteered to take over some of the individual strategies that we've organized, those being the Earns Media op-eds and other pieces that Tim referenced. I'm working with the group on the specific social media messaging, and I'm hoping others would be interested in joining that and giving us some feedback on that. So we will be in the creation phase of those social media pieces in the next, in June and early July. So we're moving forward on that and are in a good position there. We still have to solidify the day of giving for individual organizations, but there is going to be a set timeline for that, and we should have that within the next month or so for the date set in the next month or so for moving that forward. I think those are the big pieces right now. Greg, I hope can speak to the larger letter that we were putting together, and we haven't quite solidified that just yet. So I'll let Greg speak about that, but that's another strategy that we're hoping to look at. If I missed anything, please feel free to reach out to me, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Jessica, just to reiterate, so the rollout of this, the timing, you're working on it, and you think potentially right around July, August timeframe is when this might be ready to go.
Correct.
Hey everyone, this is Greg Mintz with State Rep Ken Helm's office, and I just chime in here. Davi mentioned, there's a number of audiences that we're looking at. Of course, there's the grassroots, the broader, residents, citizens of Oregon outreach, but there's also, what Tim might have mentioned. There's larger foundations, larger donors, and then there's the corporate side, whether that's just general Oregon businesses that want to be part of the community fabric and show support for the needs and interests of Oregonians, or there's also, the various relevant industries in outdoor rec and other areas that are tied specifically to these areas of interest. And so similar to what y'all may have been hearing, I believe on some of those large donors or foundations comments about enticing donations and wanting to hear a little bit more about what the specific criteria will be, what the projects will look like. That's very often very similar for what we're hearing from corporate side as well, especially if they have fairly well developed philanthropic programs within their institutions. They'll often have, pretty mature criteria in that regard too. So thank you for the work you've been doing pretty quickly here. Enjoyed seeing all the conversation and hammering out those criteria points, and excited to learn more about some of those example projects that we'll be able to highlight. So from there, we'll be integrating, an overarching coalition campaign letter that we can have folks from many different contexts sign on to. Audience there will be both other potential supporters, nonprofits, companies, foundations, whoever we can entice to join our coalition, but then also moving forward to show support to the legislature, both for the OCRF and for other natural resource funding asks that we'll be making in the future in this area. So I'll stop there, but multi-pronged approach, many different audiences, and we're looking forward to getting that extra detail from the advisory committee to jump off into that soon.
You're on mute, Carl.
Has Representative Helm joined us? You said he might. I don't see him on the list, but there's a 503 phone number. Greg, do you know if Representative Helm has joined us?
I don't think that's his phone number. Of the two I see online here, or the one, but he did give me a text that he's working on joining.
Okay, good. Okay, so that's a nice overview. There's a lot of people working really hard on this on their own time and volunteering to make this happen. Is there any specific questions from any of the people that presented before you? Jane, do you have a question?
Yeah, I just had a question as to how, I know that people are volunteering their time, and that's really, really I'm really thankful for that. I'm wondering if there are costs associated with like the social media and some of these things that, and if so, where does that money come from to do those things?
This is Jessica, and I'll briefly answer that. There is a cost associated with our time, and our individual organizations have, allowed us to take this on as a project. So my time is just covered by my organization itself. If we are talking about, and we have volunteers who have agreed to create the social media content for us on a volunteer basis as well, so without cost. However, if we are going to look into, say, boosting the social media content on Facebook or other areas like that, I have yet to look into whether or not individual organizations are willing to put in funds for that boost. Our organization will likely do so. I'm assuming that some other organizations would feel that this is worth it to do that. It's not a huge cost associated with that, but I have not asked organizations to do that yet. We do have volunteers who are willing to put in the time and effort to create the video pieces that we're hoping to do. So at this point, all cost associated with the content development is being covered by either the organizations that are volunteering to do this work or volunteers who have agreed to work with us on it. So we might run into some other costs down the road, but we have not at this point have any associated costs that will be transferred to ODFW or to the fund itself.
And to follow up on that, Tim, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit more about the Oregonian opportunity, but there are certainly things we could spend a little bit of money on that would probably have a big impact, like the cost share with the Oregonian, even printing materials that we might want to use some of the money in the fund to cover. And I think that is something we should think about with the money that we already have, that the committee does have the ability to allot some of it to the development of posters and signage that we could maybe try to put up in parks and trailheads and things like that. And then, Tim, I don't know if you wanted to say anything about the advertising.
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to that. Carl, I saw Representative Helm has joined. Do you want to have him comment before I talk about the Oregonian potential?
I think, yeah, in interest of not wasting his precious time, if Representative Helm is available to speak, it'd be great for you to weigh in on where we are and what you see happening. Representative Helm, are you there? I see his name present, but I'm not sure if he's hooked up. So on that particular topic, Davia, I knew we were looking into it, and I can't remember what we found out, but we did in fact find out that we're able to spend some money for marketing. Is that correct?
That's my understanding, yes.
Yeah. Okay. All right, well, we got a general call out to Representative Helm to weigh in whenever he gets that message. In the meantime, Suzanne has a question.
Yeah, and this may not be the right time, so this is a question about that. I got some feedback from some of the folks I have been talking to about the Conservation Fund in terms of the online link with ODF&W. And if now's a good time to share that sort of feedback, that's great. Otherwise, I can share it later.
You mean just in terms of suggestions for that, or?
Well, basically, yeah, I mean, their biggest comment boiled down to what the conservation, the language when she goes to the conservation site versus the language when they go to the ODF&W website and they click on and they see it. It's not the same language. And so as somebody this individual was buying a boating license. And as a result, she was sort of struck by the language, which is why they went back and looked at the other language. So I'm just thinking as we move forward, it would probably be really helpful to have the same message show up regardless of where you are, whether you're on the conservation strategy webpage, where you're on ODF&W's webpage, just so that there's some consistency. And that was one of her big points. And the other, and this may have been, I think she did this recently, but there wasn't a link to click on that took you to the conservation strategy. So that may have changed since they tried to, since they got their voting license. But I think it is going to be really important that every time we talk about the conservation strategy, that it's the same, every time we talk about the Conservation and Rec Fund, is that the language we use is similar. And so there was a very distinctive difference between them. And it implied very different things to her. And it actually it resulted in a decision not to click the link. So just some FYI, and maybe we can make everything be consistent in the language.
Davia, that's something you can look into.
Yes, and I was going to follow up, Suzanne. It'd be good to know exactly which pages we're talking about. We have so many.
Yeah, no, that's fine. In fact, I put this into a Word document and I will forward it to you after our meeting.
Thanks.
I will say there is a link on the site, but when I tried it, it didn't work. So
within the catalog on ODF&W's website, if you're buying something, the catalog doesn't allow links, and so we just have written visit this website. So you have to copy and paste it if you want to do that.
Okay.
Glitch.
Mark Labhart.
Yeah, similar comment to what Suzanne is talking about, but just a little bit different. And maybe Tim or Davia or you could weigh in. And I can't remember, Carl, did we talk about the Humane Society and the possibility of tapping into their donor list, which is like 100,000 people, as I understand, for the link that would go to the Oregon Wildlife Foundation? Did we talk about that at the previous meeting, or was that another meeting that you and I had that I'm sure the advisory committee to hear about it because it's pretty exciting information. So.
Yeah, that's just part of a lot of conversations that have been going on. That was not in the meeting. Among others, the Humane Societies expressed a lot of great support for us, and we haven't gotten into specifics of exactly what they can do, but they're certainly interested in helping us and moving us forward. And I in fact, have another phone conversation with them this Friday, and among others, to just sort of explore that. One of the things I'll point out now is that we're asking a lot of people to raise a lot of money for us at a time that everybody is pretty much looking to keep the doors open, and I'm going to try every way that I can to make this be a collaboration, and that we're going to move forward in a way we need to keep our partners healthy. We need to keep them viable. And this fundraising thing has to be not just all about us. And at least that's the approach I would like to take. But I have started a lot of conversations with folks to start moving forward with that. So there are some exciting possibilities out there. And a lot of that arose out of our outreach, where we sent out that questionnaire, and the response was just dramatic and wonderful. And people are very, I see Representative Helm's name on the screen. Representative Helm, are you there? Huh. Every indication is that he's here, but.
Hey, Carl, this is Greg. He's on the line and he can hear everyone, but for some reason, even though he's off mute, the system's not letting him hear him. But I'm gonna try something here while you guys are working and see if I can loop him in. Also.
Great.
So Greg, that's what we do for all state representatives, I think, is we mute them. So I couldn't pass that up, but it would be good to hear from him. So just to follow up, Carl, so the folks, I think, know that there is a small other group that is working behind the scenes to work on this fundraising effort. And of course, Tim Gressett is leading that effort. but there's a lot of opportunity, I think, for members of this advisory committee and any others that are out there to help spread the word about the Oregon Wildlife Foundation website, and where they can go directly to there and make direct donations. And they don't have to go to the ODF&W website. Of course, there is a place where you can get it there, but there are a number of different opportunities that people can go to. So, and this exploring of this idea of the Humane Society is one where I think the group is looking at the possibility of helping people to find that site where they can directly donate, because we believe that pretty strongly that Humane Society members are strong supporters of the conservation strategy and what this program is all about, and would be willing to, even $10 for those 100,000 members will put us over the top. So we want to try to get the word out to as many people as we can, and advisory committee members' help would be most appreciated if you have any contacts out there.
Davia?
Just to follow up on what Mark said, and he's sort of using this specific example of the Humane Society, but the coalition letter that Jessica and Greg both referenced is kind of intended to help us do that. And so the idea will be, when we have that letter ready, which should be soon, we will send it to all of you and to everyone that we know and say, are you interested in supporting the Oregon Conservation Recreation Fund? It'll lay out, here's information about how to join us in the social media campaign. We'd really appreciate it if you shared these on your platforms, and like Jessica talked about, maybe amplify them on your platforms as well. We can ask people to put that in their newsletter, and whatever mechanisms they have to communicate with their members. And so there's kind of two purposes there. One being putting together a list of names of organizations, corporations, individuals who support the concept of the Conservation Recreation Fund and want to help us meet the fundraising challenge, and then also some commitment by them that they're going to help be part of that fundraising. So there's that two-pronged approach to that coalition letter. And so I think sending out that letter will be the kind of the day one of the big crowdfunding effort, and should incorporate all of those partners and all the partners that anyone here knows.
So this is Jessica,
Greg.
and I just wanted to second that, Davia, but also let everyone know that I do have a master list of organizations in Oregon and elsewhere. Actually, there's nationwide organizations that we are targeting for the broader social media campaign and the coalition sign-on letter. The Humane Society, I've reached out to them as well, Carl, and so they're on board with the strategy as well. So I think we have a good coalition, but I agree with Mark that we really just have to have some targeted messages go out, and we're hoping to do that. But I did want to let you know that we do have a master list. If you're interested in that, I'm happy to share some of those names. I will say, caution at this point, that the groups that I've reached out individually to have not like officially signed on to a coalition letter, because we haven't sent out the actual draft of that, as Davia had mentioned, but we will be doing that. There's, that information.
So we have a couple of hands up. Mark Stern.
Yeah, I just wanted to express my appreciation for everybody that's been working on the fundraising, Tim, Jessica, Greg, and Davia. I think it's really obviously key to it. One question I had in terms of the letter being developed, and I think Davia, you and I might have talked about it briefly, but is there a way to also contact those people who have on their tax checkoffs, giving money to the ODF&W non-game fund? Because it seems like that would be an audience that's sort of ripe to be contacted and reached out to as well.
Tim, did you have your hand up in the video earlier?
Yeah, I did. I just wanted to, add a little bit to the conversation. So Suzanne talked a little bit about the challenges, I think, of links that work, and then consistency in messaging. So, we're going to work all that out as we roll this campaign in July, and it's going to be important for us to have a singular place for people to go to make a contribution. And so I talked with Davia a little bit, and Mauricio, I know you're very interested in helping craft a standalone donation page, and when we're in for that. So when we get to that point, what we'll want to do with all the places people see information about OCRF is drive them to one location to make a donation, which will, I think, answer some of the questions that people have about links that work and don't work. But I will also say that the part of the reason we have information in so many different places is kind of how this whole campaign rolled out to begin with, which is there was this whole initiative to try to stand up the OCRF infrastructure. And so there was a need to have information about that and what it was intended to do and the legislation that enabled it. And so we've got a really robust, I think, page on ODF&W's website that talks about has a lot of information about OCRF. And then we have our page on our website, which we had intended to just direct people to with a link to that page. But oftentimes people will come to our website and then they have to find it, which makes it too complicated in today's world. So we're going to work together to create a standalone page that with a link that will make it really simple, one-click, easy donation to the campaign moving forward. So bear with us on that. We'll get all those kinks worked out.
Tim, thank you for bringing that up. Being in that older demographic that went to your website and couldn't figure out how to make it all work, I appreciate you doing that. It looks to me like Representative Helm is inside my computer beating on the screen. Is he available yet? His name keeps coming up.
Yeah, we think he might be.
Representative Helm, are you out there?
I am continuing to try to reach you, but can you hear me?
We hear
Yeah.
you now. Yes, sir.
Okay, wonderful. I apologize. I had a better plan than the one that we're working under here for coming into the meeting today, and it included having my tablet and a hotspot at my location, and then that should have worked, but I left my tablet at home. So I apologize for the technology glitch. Carl, I was not able to join the earlier part of the meeting, and I did hear that what I think is the question is, would you like me to share what I know about what's going on at the legislature with budgeting? And if that's the correct question, yes, I definitely can.
I think at this point that it's relevant to what we're talking about, and we of course had a little bit of a scare that the rest of the committee's not aware of, where some people were asking some questions about the fund, but it turned out that was not a direct threat to us. But I think that would be useful if you could synopsize where we stand currently.
Sure. Well, first, I as we go into what is going to be, I think, a draconian budget cutting exercise over the next few months, and then again next biennium, I find myself being really thankful that the team was able to get the advisory committee set up and running so quickly and so well. And that is a silver lining, and it's really going to benefit the fund and the work that you all have been putting your minds toward over the past few months. Let me start with the good news. The good news is after word went out that our legislative fiscal office had made a polite call, I think, to Davia about what the balance of our fund currently is, it of course sent off alarm bells that that money would be swept back into the general fund for redistribution to other, worthy things that the state does in this crisis. And I made an immediate call to my co-chair of Ways and Means, Dan Rayfield, and explained to him that all the funds, that all the monies in our fund were gifts. They weren't fees, they weren't state dollars, they weren't federal dollars. They were gifts from individuals in the state. In fact, hundreds, if not thousands at this point. And that sweeping those gifts into the general fund would ruin our efforts, would hamstring what we could do in terms of raising money for this work in the future. He assured me that those funds that are gifts will not be swept. We have to hold them to it because remember, he's not the only one writing the budget. We have two senators, Senator Johnson and Senator Steiner Hayward, that are also working on, in crisis mode. So we'll need to ensure that they get the point as well, and I have confidence that that can be done. So that's the good news. The other good news is I explained to Dan what we have been doing, what you all have been doing, and the independent fundraising efforts, and said, look, I know you're going to have to adjust the budget all over the place, but what we can't endure right now, because we've got a nice head of steam up with a lot of enthusiasm, is for the sunset to snuff this fund out right as we were getting going. And he agreed with me that we could work toward eliminating the sunset so that regardless of whether state funds are allocated or general funds are allocated into the OCRF, it will continue to live. That's the good news. The bad news is the $1 million is wanted for other things. The match that we have been headed for is wanted for other things. And the budget writers are up against a really daunting task of backfilling budgets in other agencies that actually sustain people's lives. And that's a difficult decision for them to make. Dan asked me for a proposal about how to make statutory changes to House Bill 2829 so that some of the goals that we have can come to fruition. He was pretty transparent about the idea that the matching promise, which is, there's a special name for it and I can't remember, but it occurs in other places, is likely to be reduced if not go away. Now I'm going to fight for some money there, and I think we've got an excellent case to make. And I think, what I would love to have is suggestions from you all of what you think is reasonable given the crisis we're in, on a personal level, to ask the budget writers to give. I know we all believe that this money is valuable, that it'll ripple through the economy as economic stimulus in various ways, and it, for me, most importantly, aids species that need help in our state, and that enrich us all in that way. So feel free to do that, but I'll be fighting for some amount of money, and Greg and I are working on that proposal right now to send that to Representative Rayfield by Friday. And I have a good relationship with Dan. His heart is where ours are, which is he values nature and the outdoors very deeply, and so I know he would want to help us as he can, and I think he will. I fully anticipate that our fund will continue, and my recommendation to you all and everyone that's raising money for the fund is, let's continue on full steam. There's no reason not to. when we have a clear picture of what the facts are in terms of what the state will match, if any, I think our obligation is to let folks know that that's the case, and that if we get very little money or none, that we have a new challenge in front of us, and we need to meet that challenge, which continues to be to get money on the ground to help non-game species in the state. So I wish I could give you a sunnier version, but half a loaf is better than none, and we're in good shape for continuing this fund into the future and not have it be sunset by some arbitrary failure to raise the type of funds that the state challenged us to raise.
Representative Helm, thank you so much for your great work and keeping this going and getting us to this point and taking the talk to the legislature of what we're doing. A couple of things that I would suggest. One is, like, the money that has been raised now to date had the implicit guarantee that it was going to be matched. That's the way it was written. And so that would be also if at the very least they should match the money that's in the fund at the time they decide to take it, because that is a significant abrogation of what the promise was to everyone that gave that money. And that might be an argument to take to them, is like, give us let us roll out our fundraising campaign and give us a time point and match whatever we are able to raise and take the rest by a given time. That way we can go out there with the power of being able to say the money you put in here is going to get matched. And that is helpful to the state in that it's bringing in private funds to put on the ground, to hire people, to do jobs, and is an economic stimulus. So that's just my suggestion on how to approach that. But again, thank you so much for the work you've done on that.
Yeah, that's my instinct as well. And I'd be happy for you all to somehow chime in with our office through my legislative email with additional ideas.
Suzanne, you have your hand up?
Yes, this is a question for Representative Helms. It would be helpful to come up with a strategy in terms of how we would market this, because if we are not going to be certain that there's going to be a match, or if we roll out that it is going to be a match and that match suddenly changes, and this may be where Carl's suggestion becomes so important, we run the risk of completely destroying any kind of trust and goodwill in the effort. So I think getting some sort of sense from the legislature what it really is, so that we don't misrepresent to folks what we're proposing. And yeah, I just want to second Carl's idea. I mean, if anything, that might just really ramp up people's interest in donating, because there's kind of this timeline. And so why not donate to the $1 million and maybe have that $1 million match stay? So I just, this is such a new thing. When I hear this, what I hear is potential breach of trust. And that could have some very long ramifications for the fund a long, long time into the future. So the sooner we get some clarification on what options we have, I think the better.
Good comment, and I agree wholeheartedly. And I can't tell when we'll get that nod, but it won't be too long. I think they're trying to look at budgeting right now in order to understand what we might need to do in coming into a special session. So I have, by the way, just so you all know, I have a second call with Representative Rayfield in the middle of next week to reiterate the proposal, which will by then be in writing to him, and personalize this by talking it through. So there's a near-term checkpoint on this topic.
Mauricio, have you got a question?
Yeah, so sort of a comment and a question. So if I understand correctly, Suzanne and Carl, if of the donations that we've collected so far, there was a footnote on saying that this would be funds that eventually will be matched by the state. Is that correct? Yes. Okay. So maybe, I mean, I think anybody, and I understand where you're coming from, Suzanne, in terms that our case, even from the very superficial point of view, like for every dollar that you match, another dollar would be donated, makes it a much more attractive premise for anybody trying to make a donation. So if, and this is the question for Representative Helm, if there is a way in which we could manage to have at least a promissory note of some sort. I think everybody understands that these are difficult circumstances, and to ask for the budget department to make special cases, given that there are so much more important issues that are being drafted or that are being addressed because of the budget cuts. If there's a way in which we could say, like, we will know by so-and-so dates where really we stand after the COVID-19 crisis on where funds could. So if at that moment we can reevaluate and match funds up until what we have been able to manage on our own through external donations, I think that in that case, we'd still have a pretty decent premise to present everybody. And that will make a stronger case for our fundraising efforts. And so I don't know if that's something that could potentially be arranged, even if it sounds a little bit insubstantial.
Thank you. Suzanne? I'm sorry, go ahead, Representative.
I like the underlying notion there. And I think these arguments around fairness and what lawyers would refer to in contracting as promises made and that should be fulfilled. Those are strong arguments, and I think we can deploy them in that way.
Great. Chris or Jane or Marat, have you got any questions or comments? Tim? Suzanne, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a point of clarification in terms of Mauricio and in terms of Representative Helms. I just think the most important thing, however it rolls out, is that when you're donating money, you know where you are in the story. So you know exactly what you're doing. The expectations are just clear. That's the only piece that for me I was trying to make, was that transparency. And if that changes over time because things change in the budget, that's okay. As long as that's clear to the public. So if I'm donating, I know I'm matched or I'm not matched. I think everybody gets that things are kind of in flux right now. And so that's the only point I was trying to make, is making sure who's ever hitting the send button on their contribution just knows where we are in the process.
Good point.
Representative Helm, I know you weren't able to participate early on, but I think you're aware, the committee's moving very quickly. We have made progress in setting up our framework, and maybe more importantly to our current discussion, we are very deep in discussions regarding coming up with a portfolio of worthy projects in the short term that we can use to demonstrate what we're doing. And I think the value of that is not just to our donors, but to the legislature. And I wanted you to be aware that we are having those conversations that you can use next week if you have to point out that we are moving on this, and we're not going to wait. So we'll have further discussions on that later this afternoon.
Good. Let me just say this. I think you're on the right track, and I'm going to encourage you to continue on that track.
Thank you for that. Mark, you have a question?
Yeah, a question for Rep. Helm, and again, appreciate your leadership on this. I'm wondering if there's a time or a place for us as a committee or for individuals to weigh in with some of the budget writers, and if so, if that's something that you can kind of keep us appraised of what would be timely and in terms of a letter or a call or just sort of a point of input from our group here, either collectively or as individuals, and how that might or might not be helpful in your opinion.
I think that I would like there to be, and I don't think it is unreasonable. I think it's actually very powerful given the type of outreach that's already been done into the conservation and recreation communities, and how you are just day by day, you're widening that circle. So we're building this very robust coalition of organizations and people and enthusiasts. I think if we have an opportunity, it's a great thing to do. What I will want to be doing here is trying to get a sense of the lay of the land and how those messages will land on the ears of folks that are trying to balance the needs of some of the very most needy people in the state, their health and well-being, versus the type of work that we do. And let me just say this, I think that it is long past due in this state to pursue a very strong conversation about the needs of other species besides Homo sapiens, besides human beings. It's not an either-or equation. It isn't that we can't have what we need to thrive as human beings when other species get a break from our constant interference with their lives and well-being. And that is a really hard message to push forward right now. It's just antithetical, I think, to a way that the majority of other people in the state think, but it's not invalid and it's not insensitive to human needs either. And I would love it if we could start making that kind of point on its own merit.
Mark Labhart, did you have a question?
Yep, question and a comment. Comment first. Boy, I'm getting feedback. Oh, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. First of all, Representative, thank you for, wow, I'm getting a lot of feedback, for all your work on this. Really very much appreciated. I'm sure you're getting pulled in a lot of directions from a lot of your constituents now in terms of funding. So thank you for your attention to this matter. What I would say in terms of another, maybe a question and a comment, the discussion that we had earlier with the advisory committee was about this Kickstarter and the fundraising. We have about $60,000 in the account right now, and we had a lot of discussion about what kind of projects potentially could be funded in terms of 50,000-foot priorities. But I can tell you that all of these projects that are in the discussion are getting people back to work, and their infrastructure projects and their economic development projects, and it's getting Oregonians back to work. And this money will go on the ground in terms of conservation related projects, but it gets Oregonians back to work, and somebody that may be unemployed would come out of this with a project on the ground and doing good things for the environment as well as for our infrastructure in terms of people, getting people back to work. So that would be a strong case I would lobby you to make to your fellow legislators, is this money that people have donated out of their own pockets gets people back to work in Oregon. So it does help that human factor that you mentioned.
You bet. I couldn't agree more, Mark. And Davia is now helping Greg and I with some numbers around that so that we can, in our proposal, make a fairly accurate and colorable statement about what we think the economic multiplier will be as we deploy the funds on the ground. So yes, great point. Trying to get going on that as best we can, and it with the goal of putting that as part of the proposal that I give to Representative Rayfield.
Great, thank you.
This is Greg as well. Following up on that, and I would just invite everyone on the call here to send us insights you have from your personal work or organizations on that data. You know, we'd really love to incorporate it in this short turnaround here by the end of the week.
I can direct you to a website right here in Oregon that has done a tremendous amount of work on that. The Ecosystem Workforce Program at University of Oregon. I'll connect that with you. They have a lot of data, a lot of information about the multiplier and the jobs created by these types of projects. Very, very valuable stuff. Okay, so just in the interest of moving along, because we need to act on some of the things we've been hearing, I would just urge the committee members to reach out to the folks that you heard present from the fundraising group and see how we can help them. You can do that individually. I think we really need to try to move forward on coordinating the committee and fundraising. And that leads us, I think, into the discussion I was planning on having this afternoon. And Representative Helm, we appreciate you joining us. If you care to stay and listen to what we're going to discuss, then we would appreciate that. But it's going to be relevant in the sense of trying to develop that portfolio of projects that you and others can then use to move this forward. So I see.
I see your hand up there.
I just have a quick question. Can we, was it for me? Or did I cut something else? Oh, I'm just wondering if we could get an email so that if we actually connect with folks who are doing environmental work or restoration, like watershed councils that we know, and they're actually doing that, you know, they're hiring contractors or whatever, is there a place we could send them so that they could provide some of that information for you, Representative Helms? I think that's what you were asking, if we happen to, you know, if we had contacts to reach out to them. Was I correct on that?
This is Greg. That's right. Let's, if Davia doesn't mind, use her as the clearinghouse for that for now. She's helping to look in a couple avenues already. And I think that if she's willing, that would be a great way to consolidate it.
Certainly, and it's a quick turnaround. Like Representative Helm said, he has that meeting next Wednesday, and so this week is really when we're looking for that information. It won't hurt to get it later on, but it won't help this effort.
Good clarification.
Great, thank you all for that. That was so I'll ask. Does anyone from the fundraising group have any final things they'd like to add to what we've talked about?
This is, so I provided the Oregonian proposal to Davia for distribution to the committee. Seems like everything runs through Davia. Thank you, Davia. I guess take a look at that. Basically, what I'm suggesting would be putting a little bit of the money we've raised so far into collaboration with the Oregonian. We'd be looking for at basically kind of a 3-month campaign investment for OCRF. It would work in conjunction with everything we've discussed so far in terms of in terms of reaching out to the public, both on using social media platforms as well as earned and paid media advertising. So this would be a bit of a foray into advertising in the Oregonian, and in particular the strategy that I think would be a good investment would be a combination of print and digital with the Oregonian. So I think rather than burden you with additional conversation or more time spent on this, I don't want to get in your way, but I would direct you to take a look at the proposal and then do let me know what your thinking is about making an investment in some advertising and on both digital and print platforms.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the work you're doing on this. So, Sherilyn, you had something you wanted to bring up before we move on?
Yeah, just before we move to the next agenda topic, as per normal, the last half hour of our agenda, 3 to 3:30 p.m., is for public comments. So if you are on the call and you would like to use that time, if you could send me a note on the chat, and then I'll know how many people we have and make sure we allow enough time during that slot.
Thank you, Sherilyn. So the last part of this, Davia early on said that she should go over the process that she did earlier before we had that discussion on our short-term issues, and I wasn't listening well enough and made her wait till the end of the day, and it would have been great to have heard all this before that discussion. So what you did hear part of it. So what I'd like to do is have Davia again go over the difference between what we're trying to do in the short term and what the competitive soliciting grants from a broad spectrum, the differences in timing. And then after that, I'd like to dive more into the short-term plan now that you've heard from the fundraising and from Representative Helm, the importance of trying to come up with something. So, Davia, you want to start with just sort of reiterating what you told us earlier?
Sure thing. And I decided I should write it down. You guys don't just have to listen to me. But the impetus for putting this on the agenda is that, we got started and we had our first meeting over 2 different meetings, doing the getting to know you piece. And as we talked about, okay, what are we doing here? What does the committee want to do? What is all your individual perspectives? We all got right to, well, we need criteria. We can't really figure out how we're going to make these grants unless we know what kind of grants we want to make and what those priorities will be. And we dove right into developing the framework, which is a great starting point, but it's going to inform how we actually expend money. And so, we're doing really well. I'm really excited about how much progress we've made. But I wanted to check in with the paper side of this, and I talked to our administrative services division in the grants and contracting group here at ODFNW, just to talk about, okay, how does this really work in reality? How do we get from money in the fund to money in the hand of a project manager or whoever has submitted a grant to us? So this would be the grant making process for the competitive process. And it's very high level here, just a couple of bullet points of the steps we'll have to go through. And so the first step is going to be sending out some sort of notice of funding opportunity, or RFP. We called it an RFP in our framework, and we'll have to rely on the contracts people on what the right thing to call it is when we know what it is. But we talked a little bit about that today, right? And talking about what the template will be and how we're going to evaluate those and what information people are going to need before they go forth and send us a proposal. I mentioned before that we have in the administrative rules for this kind of advisory committee, we'll need those applications in a minimum of 60 days before the meeting at which we'll consider them. And so assuming we'll want to give 30 to 60 days notice for people that are submitting a proposal to us, we'll need to add some time there for the review to happen. And many of the other programs, like the Restoration Enhancement Board and the Access and Habitat Program, which are similar functions within ODFW, they do this quarterly. And so they have 4 deadlines throughout the year. So the funding opportunity is out there all the time, and there's 4 deadlines throughout the year. And so that, we don't have a lot of time left, so we maybe could do 1, maybe it'll be 2, and that'll be something to talk about at a later date too. But we'll have to figure out what those deadlines are, kind of working backwards from commission approval. So once we have those proposals in hand, ODFW staff will process them and send out the materials that we have to you all for review. So we'll need some sort of scorecard that you guys will be able to use to get some objective measures of how we compare projects. You all will have whatever amount of time you decide you would like to review those materials, send back your scorecard or your review sheet, whatever it is we come up with. And then we'll post those with meeting materials on our website with the agenda for the next meeting. And at that meeting, you all will discuss each proposal and vote on whether you'd like to recommend it for funding to the commission. And that meeting at which we do that will have to be about 30 days or more before the commission meeting, so that we can prepare a packet of materials on these projects to the commission. So then the commission will meet. This will be an exhibit, so it'll be open to public comment. And either I or Carl will be the person that goes in front of the commission and says, here's the projects we received, here's our assessment of them, and here's why we think you should fund these ones or not fund these ones, however that may go. And then once the commission approves those at their meeting, those are officially considered granted. And then we'll have to work on entering into a grant agreement between ODF&W and the organization that's been successful in order to actually physically move that money. And so that's kind of just the steps we have to go through. And I just wanted you all to be aware of what that looks like going forward, because we are going to have to do some more work at each stage to make sure we're ready to do each of these things. And so we have work ahead of us for sure. And this is for the competitive process. And so to Carl's point about wanting to move as quick as we can to have something to say in the fundraising when asked what exactly will this be spent on, to develop some of those concepts and that suite of projects. We can you guys see my cursor? I think you can. We can kind of, skip over the deadlines and the length of time that comes in with a lot of these, and we can kind of go right to the idea of the committee bringing in proposals that will be reviewed as a group, because we don't have the deadlines associated with getting materials in from the competitive process. So if the committee wants to just bring in a few ideas based on the concepts that Carl talked about, we can go from there, talk about those as the committee, decide on what those will be, and bring them to the commission. And so that's a way to do something a little bit speedy, get some demonstration projects, and keep rolling. So that's what I wanted to give you guys today. There's no decision point, just wanted to make sure that information is out there and have this in mind for how we'll structure the agendas for the meetings to come in the next few months, is to make sure we have the materials ready for this and can move as fast as possible.
Thank you, Davia. So any questions about that process and the difference between the competitive one and the one that we're proposing that we embark on here in the short term? I don't see any. Okay, so what I'd like to do to kick this off, I want to do it by way of example, and also because I want to discuss an issue that we've talked about and I think is very important to all of us, especially with the events that have occurred. but it's pertinent to what we're discussing. As you recall, there was one of the buckets that I put out there was the inclusion and reaching out to underserved communities. And I want to just use this as an example. I asked Marat to reach out to Portland Audubon because we'd been talking about this, is very important to the group, to reach out just to kind of get a sense of who the players were. And so Marat, are you willing and able to give us a little bit of background on what you found out? Just a real quick synopsis.
Yeah, sure. So if you all remember, Bob Salinger from Audubon was quite passionate when he spoke with us. And so I did a little follow-up with him. How's the sound?
Good.
Okay. You know, it was very much reiterating the points that he'd already discussed, that we needed to demonstrate this is not business as usual. And that he felt that the urban audiences had been neglected. And I looked at his background, and, you know, he's worked in urban wildlife issues for years with backyard certifications and dealing with injured wildlife that people turn in the city. And so he's had a very real experience there. He said he would share names and contacts of a coalition of urban groups that he's worked with. And he's sort of got other things on his mind right now. His wife is recovering from some treatments. And so I was really glad that he talked with me. He's very, very kind. And he also I kind of gave him a little heads up that the fund maybe the match, you know, was a little bit in flux at times. We'd heard that it might be in danger, and he was really not worried about that. He thought that the pushback would be so hard because the project had been a decade in the works, and the amount of passion that it took to get where we are right now was huge. And so he felt that, you know, maybe things will be different. I don't know. He said he was glad to hear about the early spending. He thought that would be a good way to demonstrate what we were about. And so that was great. And, you know, I also talked with Karina Salmond at Caldera Arts, which is a group that works with urban youth. And so many nonprofits right now are in flux and have, you know, their executive director is an interim one, and they're having to cancel their camp, which is usually at Blue Lake in Central Oregon. And they bring all these kids from inner city Portland that they've worked with since they were 12, and kids from Warm Springs, Madras area. And they work with these kids for years. And we had 4 of them that worked at the Forest Service with us, and it was a wonderful, interesting experience. So those kids are looking for something to do this summer. They've got them in online camp, and they're not very excited. And I talked to her about, you know, they could act as a focus group if we wanted to run some PR materials by them, or they're very creative, and, you know, they could possibly have other ideas. But then she mentioned there was a project that they had just been rejected on. And then she's like, I'm so glad you called me, because it was a project partnering with Trout Unlimited, Derek Staub, and the Forest Service on a restoration of Link Creek. And that's a small creek that links Subtle Lake and Blue Lake. It's the only existing population left in Oregon of sockeye salmon, and that little creek is the spawning grounds. And so there's a little project that they've cooked up that would put some more wood in that creek, and it was going to involve Caldera students. So that's just an example of me trolling out there with somebody that I had a relationship with, and, you know, found out a nice project that they had already written up and had all the details, and it was rejected as a grant. So I guess that's about all I have.
Mara, thank you. And that was, I think, a beautiful segue into what I wanted to show, and that is Marat. I'm sorry, is it Marat or Marat?
It's probably Marat is fine, yeah. Marat is the Estonian pronunciation, so
okay. Marat is what I'm actually used to.
That's okay.
So she just described beautifully, the projects are out there. They're waiting for us to fund them. In a similar vein, I spoke with Oregon Wild, who is the fiscal sponsor for Viva Northwest, who right now is seeking funds to generate information for non-English speakers, particularly Hispanics, on how to get back outside safely in the time of COVID. How do you do it? What is a safe way to get outside and interact with nature and not be a risk to yourself or to others? It's like the projects are there. So that's just a segue into discussing this. I think you all heard the imperative to try to get this on the ground. One imperative is that I still don't know that we're safe from the funds. It is a dire situation, and the sooner we spend those funds, the better. I think we need to get them on the ground. So I felt we had a pretty good resolution to the fact that, yes, we're fine with moving forward with this short-term deal. What I would like to achieve now is a general agreement that among us that this is the appropriate way to go. And the next step truly is going to be to find those projects that fit within those categories. And there may be projects that don't quite fit, but I do want to produce a diverse spectrum of projects. And that's what I put out there was just a guideline of you can find ones that fit into each of those categories or maybe not. That's why we have special situations. So that's before the meeting is over. We got, I think, 15 minutes to talk about this. That's what I would like us to leave with, so that by the time we hit the next meeting, you guys are ready. You maybe have found some projects, and we've got people listening to us in the audience, and they know of projects. And what Davia, Mauricio, and Sherilyn and I will do, they don't know this yet, but what we're going to do next week is try to figure out an appropriate way to vet these and present that to you. So we can say, okay, here's, we have to be responsible in this. We have to be able to review them. Maybe we'll have some ODF and W staff take a look at them, but that's something we've got to come up with. We'll work on that. And what I would ask is y'all to be thinking about appropriate projects. They can't be big in the sense that if we're going to give, say, $10,000 to a $200,000 project, that's not really going to be impactful. We want it to be impactful. So with that, I'll open it up to everybody and hear your comments. Suzanne, you don't have your hand up, but.
I just had a quick question for Marette and for you. Can you guys give me a sense of what those projects cost? Just this will just help me. Like the Viva Northwest in terms of the materials, Marette, the project that they were trying. That just is going to give me a framework. Thanks.
Yeah, I'm doing some follow-up with Derek Stubb and Nate Dockler from the Forest Service that are working on that, and that was a question that I was going to ask them. I haven't gotten the number yet, so that's a good point.
I also did not get a number, but it was clear that it was less than $10,000.
Carl, I can jump in with some information on that. As Jorge Guzman, the executive director of Viva Northwest, and I have been talking about that project, the Office of Outdoor Recreation created a responsible recreation messaging toolkit with state parks and Travel Oregon. Viva Northwest is, as you said, seeking to translate those materials. They want to produce videos in particular, and each video, creating a script, translation, professional production would be around $1,500 to $2,000. So $10,000 would cover 5 different short videos. Suzanne, thanks.
So again, and Kaylin, you also when I talked to you about this and told you, well, maybe we could spend $10,000 on a recreational related project, you rattled off several that we would be able to fund more than one with meaningful money that meant something. It wasn't just like a little bit for them, and it would get them off the ground going. So was that an accurate interpretation on my part?
Yeah, I did. And recognizing kind of one of the core elements is, sorry, I'm getting terrible feedback again. Funding from multiple sources contributes both to the strength of a project and is probably a strategy that we would embrace as well, right? So that, you know, $5,000 wouldn't cover perhaps a full project, but I mentioned in particular some planning, cultural resource review, and sort of other needs related to Klamath Dam removal and future recreational site access or interpretive development. That's a project that I'm working on with ODFW directly and other stakeholders. And the full budget there is $7 million. Would our contribution be meaningful? Yes, because that too is in the early stages. So if we're trying to signal this is the type of project that the Conservation and Recreation Fund is interested in, I do think it's meaningful.
See, that was very exciting to me when I talked to Kaylin about that. And I'll just throw out, I guess I'm not going to be too shy about this. My own personal favorite project that came across my desk, more or less, and that's sea otter reintroduction on the Oregon coast. I heard that was going on, and I didn't know that was even a thing, and I got personally quite excited about it. I didn't even think about it in the context of the committee, but it turns out that there is very similar to what Kaylin was talking about. There's a movement towards reintroduction of sea otters. That's going to be multi-million dollars, but they're just getting started. I'm under the impression nothing meaningful has been exchanged, but they're in the need of around 10 grand to get that project started. It's a foundation that's been formed, and they're moving forward with that, and so I'm quite excited about that. But I put that out there though as an example. So what I would, I'm looking to see anybody else got some thoughts or input after that?
Jane?
Well, I've been very intrigued by the Sea Otter project for a long time, and I think that would be something that definitely would get people excited. I know there's some obstacles with it, but it's a very sexy project as far as donors go, I think. And Mark just wrote a comment about how about something with pond turtles, and I happen to have been working on that as a member of the Native Turtle Working Group. And I am quite sure that the pond turtle people would be very happy to come up with a proposal. And in fact, they've already have 3 ideas they've shared with me. One is to create juvenile turtle habitat. Another is to do tracking of juvenile turtles to learn more about where they hang out and what they do and what they need. And another is just to do more surveying of pond turtles. We have to find out where they still are in order to know where we need to protect them. So the turtle people for sure would love to have an opportunity to come up with something.
Maret? Maret?
Yeah, I was just thinking that one thing, even for the short-term projects, I know we've talked about this for the long-term projects, but looking for things where there's partnership, because whatever amount of money we're giving, it's not very much, but if it can be matched by another foundation or another nonprofit, then that makes it so much more impactful. So just a thought about those short-term projects, looking for coalitions and groups working together. And I was kind of surprised talking to Caldera. They weren't working with as many groups as I thought, and Audubon never heard of them. And it's just like, but they're working with some other groups, and I just wonder how much more they could get done with more of a coalition, and how much we could get done with looking at those kind of projects. That's all. Thanks.
Mark Labhart?
Yeah, thanks, Carl. I think I want a strong support for the Sea Otter project. I think you're going to hear from that from Danielle, part of the public comments. She's going to talk a little bit about that, about a webinar tonight that people might want to join. The other thing is, and just following up with Moret, here on Highway 97 south of Bend, it's called the death trap for migrating mule deer and elk and cougars and bobcats migrating. And there's a large coalition of folks, including ODOT and Oregon Hunters Association and many others, that are building an overpass at Gilcrest, and there needs to be a fencing project there. So might want to consider putting some money into that to buy a couple miles of fence, because there needs to be fence, and they can show some quick turnaround there about building some fence to keep wildlife from getting killed crossing Highway 97, which is a major problem in Oregon. And ODF&W has it as a very high priority to try to reduce the amount of wildlife that's getting killed on Highway 97. And maybe we could potentially buy a few miles of fence and say, we encourage others to adopt a few miles of fence by buying some miles there too. So just some thoughts. Thanks.
Mark, I appreciate you bringing that up. And in particular, I've been in discussion with some folks about that particular project. And I believe that there may be some greater opportunities to leverage that beyond the idea of one of our $10,000 chunks. I'd like to see a campaign where we're going to raise significant money. They've raised $700 million of nearly $1 million, and I would love to start a campaign through the fund to meaningfully address that problem. So that's how we're working on that.
Good idea.
Mark Stern?
Yeah, I like the ideas that have been brainstormed here and thrown out. I also like there's a geographic diversity to them in terms of the coast with sea otters. Turtles probably more Western Oregon, Willamette Valley, and the highway crossing is obviously South Central Oregon. And I guess I would also just add, maybe a bunch of you saw it, but there was I know wildlife crossings are often thought about in terms of big game animals primarily, but there was a video that was went viral a little bit that showed a coyote leading a badger through a underground tunnel crossing along a highway corridor. And I guess just a point that it's not only game animals that would use it, but potentially non-game animals as well. So I kind of like that integration of activities.
Suzanne?
This is actually just a request to the group. Hey, you guys, I know a number of organizations I can reach out to, watershed councils, citizen science groups in the Blue Mountain ecoregion. I don't have contacts in my other ecoregion, in the Columbia Plateau. So if you happen to have a group that you know of that I could specifically reach out to in my capacity as sort of representing them, I would really like to do that. So if you happen to know anybody, or you can put me into touch with somebody who might know somebody, because it would be nice. I'm going to reach out to the couple of groups that I know in the Blue Mountains area, but I'd really like to find some folks who might be doing some neat things in the Columbia Plateau ecoregion. So that's just a request to all of you. So just send me a message if you know someone. Thanks.
To build on that, Suzanne, for all of the eco-regional representatives, we have district biologists in all over the state. And I can help get people in touch with our staff too, who might be able to help.
Now, let me interject. Tim Davis just informed me that he has to leave, and I just wanted to point out to Tim before he goes that you're out there in a place that's very underrepresented, and it would be wonderful to find an appropriate project in your neck of the woods that helps show that geographic distribution. I just wanted to bring that up before you have to go pick up your kids. So,
yeah, I have some ideas that I'll bounce off in the very near future. I'm still doing some background work before I put them forward. So,
all right, Tim, thanks for that.
Yeah.
Okay, so man, it's like 2:58. What I think I'm getting a sense that people are on board this concept, and what I propose is that the four of us will kind of figure out maybe we'll talk to some ODF&W staff. We'll figure out appropriate ways to vet these so that we can't just rubber stamp them, and we got to have a way to assess them. And then I think we should take some of the next meeting. You bring these projects to us. Let's start working on them. Let's find out what's out there. And I would ask the folks in the audience, we're happy to hear your ideas. Just remember, we're not going to be able to fund a ton of stuff, but if you've got a good idea, we want to hear about it. Does that sound, can I get a visual thumbs up from everybody that thinks that's a reasonable plan? Nice. Okay, sweet. All right, well, I'm good with that. So with that, I guess we don't adjourn until we've heard the public. Is that correct?
Yeah, sorry, I was on mute there, Carl.
So I think with that, we got a lot done today. Thank you guys so much, man. I think this is a very onerous process, and to do it without ever having met any of you in person, for all of us to work together like this, I think it's astonishing. I think it just speaks to the commitment that people have to this, and in the times that we're in, you can take solace from the work that you're doing and that you're making things better. That's how I'm going at it. And so thank you all so much for this. With that, we'll turn it over to Sherilyn, and you can hear from the members of the audience.
Sure. Davia has something before we move to that. And also, so far, I only have one person that's made a request to make comments. So unless we get more, it might be short. Davia?
So what Carl just said about the difficulty of doing this as a virtual activity, I totally agree, and I appreciate all of this. And as we get ready for phase 2 reopening in a lot of parts of the state, I just wanted a gut check from you all. Do you want me to be trying to pursue the opportunity for an in-person meeting, or should we plan for kind of the rest of the summer virtually? Just on your own personal comfort levels, I just wanted to get a sense.
Why don't we have folks just respond to you offline, maybe an email. Let me have time to think about it, and because I'm thinking about it and I'm not quite sure what I think.
Yeah, so just think about that and let me know, because I think in theory we may be able to start planning in-person meetings in July, maybe. There's a lot of uncertainty still, but if that's a thing that you guys really want to do, we can, try to make sure we're on the forefront of planning that. And if not, we can keep going virtually. So yeah, just think about that and let me know.
Good points, Davia. I know everybody's trying to figure out what's allowable and then what everybody is comfortable doing. Don't always align. Okay, so we have 2 people that are from the public that wanted to make comments. So we'll start with Jim Atkinson from OHA.
Okay, thank you for having this opportunity to participate in this as a stakeholder. It has been, I think, a very productive meeting. A lot of good information transferred. And I guess I'm saying this as much from the standpoint of being born and raised in this state of Oregon as an Oregonian. I think it's important that there's an adherence to fundamentals, such as these projects both connect to conservation and recreation. And I think in particular at the onset with these first allocations of funding, it needs to connect to both those aspects. And, the sea otter stuff's fantastic. That's great. I'm not going to argue against that. But I think the more basic it is, the greater the appeal is going to be to other Oregonians for supporting the project, both in concept and potentially financially. And some basics I've thought of are just nature safety. Mark talked about the highway crossing situation. That's extremely fundamental, and the mortality that we've had on wildlife there. Nature appreciation, there's many ways to go about doing nature appreciation. I've mentioned before, when I had the opportunity to speak to this group, this Ochiko Trails organization that's developing some trails around the Crooked River National Grasslands. And they have a very strong interest in making that more than just an exercise opportunity, but an opportunity to learn about and document nature and nature occurrence. So there's a little bit of citizen science integrated with that one. And then the last one's nature education. And I think this particularly pertains to the more urban part of our citizenry, that they have the opportunity to learn about how diverse this state is. I mean, you know, we're talking everything from sea otters to beavers to wolves to mountain goats and bighorn sheep. And there's just a lot to learn about nature in this state. And so I guess my message is keep it fairly basic, particularly at the onset. And that's pretty much it for me. So turn it back.
Great. Any questions for Jim? Okay. Danielle Moser.
Thank you. Can you all see me?
Yes.
Okay. Appreciate the opportunity to speak, and I was unable to listen to the whole meeting today. So, and if I'm repeating anything, I apologize. But from what I did hear, it was really robust, and I appreciate hearing all the different thoughts going on and potential projects. So yeah, I just wanted to flag for you the Sea Otter webcast that Carl and Mark referenced in some of their comments. So just to learn more about the history of sea otters, sort of the ecological role of the species, you know, why they are in California, Washington, and Alaska, but not in Oregon. We're doing a webcast, Oregon Wild and the Alaka Alliance together this evening in 3 hours, so at 6 o'clock. So if you're interested in staying on the computer, which I can understand if you're kind of tapped out, but that's available, and I'm going to put the link just to everybody in the chat so you know how to sign up. But it is also going to be recorded, so if you do want to watch it afterwards, you can do that too. And then while I have the microphone, I would like to also, you know, I've been thinking about this, and I chatted with Carl as well about it. I think another project, and kind of actually speaks to what Jim Akinson just talked about, and I think there's you know, one thing in my mind that rises to the top in thinking of the intersectionality of conservation and recreation, and that is as it relates to the potential return of California condors to the state. There's, you know, an opportunity for the Yurok tribe in Redwood National Park to be releasing condors in Northern California, possibly next year. And so, you know, the condors could be returning to the state pretty soon. If you know anything about the recovery of condors, you know that lead in particular is a challenge. So I know OHA and ODF&W and others have signed on to this national partnership. And, you know, if there's any money to be used toward education and outreach, potentially doing demonstration with hunters about switching to non-lead ammo, I think that would also be a good use of funds. So I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Great. We really appreciate all the folks that stay on the line.
We did get one more late request, Carl. Can we take it since we're still early?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. Leland Brown.
Hi, can you guys see me and hear me?
Yep.
I've had some issues with this computer already today, so I just want to make sure. Just very briefly, I imagine you expect me to make a comment at this point. So from ORTWS, just, you know, it's disappointing to hear the issues with the budget, obviously understandable, but glad to see that there continues to be movement and the discussion around the both economic benefit of conservation and employment of wildlife professionals and all that goes along with conservation work. As well as the broad benefit to the communities that are associated with those conservation projects. On a more personal and professional note, individually, you know, the North American Non-Lead Partnership was just mentioned by Danielle Moser. I co-founded the North American Non-Lead Partnership. We are very proud to have the partners that we have. We continue to work to benefit wildlife and continue the heritage of conservation that's associated with the hunting community. And although the condor is an important iconic species with lead exposure, I recommend that we not forget that we're talking about broader ecosystem health, and not get kind of attached to an individual endangered species as kind of the flag for the effort. We are, would always be happy to have funding to help support helping the hunting community transition to non-lead ammunition, but at the moment we're not in a position, unless asked, to put in requests for grant funding from this conservation fund. We think there's probably other ways that that money can be spent that would be beneficial to a broader suite of species, especially as identified with the conservation strategy. We have other funding that we're using through ODFW for that. So I just wanted to make that very clear. We're obviously more than happy to talk about the work that the partnership is doing, how that benefits wildlife and recreation across the board. But at the moment, it's not on our list of funds to approach for the partnership or for non-lead ammunition. So thank you.
Great. Well, thanks for that, Leland. Again, I think there's, just like was demonstrated, there's a ton of projects out there. But again, as Leland demonstrated, we got to vet them all and make sure that they're going to work and that they're appropriate and they're impactful. So I ask you all to, between now and next meeting, to start thinking about that. Let your partners and our partners know what we're looking for, and we'll move forward then. In the meantime, we'll work on some criteria and ways we can make the right choice about these things. Does anybody on the committee have any? Davia has her hand up.
I just wanted to say, Carl, you were talking about talking to people and finding project ideas, that all of the folks that submitted comments in our partner outreach a couple weeks ago, you guys have the packet of their responses, and there's email addresses in there if there's folks that you want to follow up with directly on ideas that they had in those responses. And that's all on our website, but I can also send it to you if you need it.
Okay, well, we got a ton done. That was a great meeting. Thanks for all of your input. And we will, when's the next meeting, Davia?
June 22nd.
Oh, 22nd.
All right, great. So we're going to have things rolling by then, and this will all be in conjunction. And I'll reiterate, think about that fundraising piece and how you might be able to help and work with. And I want this to be all of us working together so we know what's happening. So with that, I think we can call the meeting adjourned. And again, thank you all very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye. Sherilyn, you and Davia want to stick around in Mauricio just for a sec?
Sure.
Hey, Carl, this is Mark. I have one thought for you.
Yeah.
Oh, well, maybe I'll follow up.
I'm all ears.
We're not a quorum, so you guys can chat however you want.
I just wasn't sure who else is still on at this point.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
I just wasn't sure who else was still on at this point. I think it's going well. There's some good ideas. I have a couple other thoughts, but I'll follow up with you offline.
Okay, please, Mark, I'd love to chat with you just in general, like even this evening if you're up for it.
Yeah, okay.
Sometime at your convenience in the next day or two.
All right. Thanks all.
I value your counsel. All right. Okay, so I don't want to keep y'all any longer. Just thank you all so much for the work you guys are doing. Davia, you especially. I mean, we keep piling things on you, and I appreciate you getting all that stuff done. So, and it's so weird having these. I adjourn the meeting, and you want to go shake somebody's hand or something, slap them on the back, and you can't really do it. And so I'm slapping you all on the back.
You
Okay?
can't do that when we're in person either anymore.
That's right.
So,
No punching allowed.
when do you want to meet again for our pre-meeting? I'm open to what we do have to. I think that's our next order of business. We got a lot done. We got a lot off our plate, I feel like. And now we can start focusing on some nitty-gritty stuff. But we do got to start thinking about that the process from here. I don't think we're going to have any problem finding projects. Then it's going to be, how do we pick them?
Yeah, I think we need a defensible approach to how we pick them. Because it's going to be biased, right? It's going to be biased by who people know, and so that's something we have to be careful about.
I have.
Mauricio, you're a little quiet. We can hear you, but you're quiet.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
I said on that note, I sent privately a message to Davia, and I sent you a message to Carl. I have a pretty big bias on some of the names that were floating today. So I'm actually, as we were talking, I messaged some of the folks that were associated with. I'll reach out to you specifically. I don't think it's adequate for me to speak about that, but yeah, I can't hear you. Sorry.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I brought that particular one up as just an example. And also, I'm not sure what you want to say to me, but we have to vet all this stuff.
Yes. Well, so here's the I'm just going to go ahead and say it. So here's what happens. You're familiar with, in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king.
Yeah. Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
So when it comes to matters of justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, that is also very much the case. So anybody that feels on the void tends to not only get the most attention, but get inherent trust on whatever is it that they're doing. And nobody checks on deliverables because it feels also like it's putting into question the validity of their identity. And that is the case, in my opinion, with Viva Northwest. One of the things that worry me, for instance, is that if anybody were to spend 5 minutes looking at the credentials of the gentleman behind it, they'll notice that he is CEO of at least 6 to 7 organizations. And that, not coincidentally enough, one of them is video production. And so I've known this gentleman from my time in Univision, because he is, among the many endeavors that he has, he also took Hispanic Pros Network from Portland under his wing. And the way that he became the CEO of that organization also was quite controversial among Latino community. And so what I've mentioned to Davia before, and what I mentioned, like, the premise behind it is fabulous, of course. And so I would not necessarily dismiss a proposal, but I think that it would be very, very important for us to be very diligent about those measurements of success and what can be used as past endeavors. Here's another nugget of information. The reason why I am the chief editor and manager of the Northwest Family Vacation app as per the Intertwine Alliance is because, and by the way, the Intertwine Alliance was one of the fiscal sponsors for Viva Northwest before. And they had to drop him for this very instance. He did not deliver on the things that he was paid for. And that's why I had to step in. And there are a few other circumstances in which, so what I'm saying, and I have had little to no interaction with this gentleman other than the pleasantries of just being in the same spaces here and there. So that's as much personal reference as I can give to the subject. But I, from what I know of the instances in which we've crossed paths, there are ethical concerns that we should be watchful for as we come to delivering to these things. And what I would hate to happen, which is what unfortunately happens a lot of times when you're dealing with people of color that present proposals, is that because everybody wants to be polite and everybody wants to be, then a lot of the most surface things that if you would look into a proposal from anybody else, which also happens to not be of an ethnic, diverse background, would be unacceptable.
Yeah.
And so that's all I can say about that.
Mauricio, your comments about that just bring a lot of things to my mind. And one is, if we truly internalize this idea and it's part of who we are, then we're not going to hesitate to say, wait a minute, you got to deliver. We want something. And it's like, we're not on either side of the fence on it. This is part of who we are. We're doing this, and you got to do a good job, or we're not going to give you the money. So I think that crossed my mind, is that the more we adopt this whole approach, the more we'll be able to be effective. So,
and one thing to this, which is I suspect one of the concerns that Suzanne had, is when we move into a values-based metric. This is a sort of a gray area in which a lot of this can be BS, if you